Just before Christmas, someone was selling an RG476H. This was on one of the many forums and Discord servers that I frequent because clearly I've got nothing better to do than talk aimlessly about little Chinese rectangles. At the time, I couldn't afford it, but I did express some interest, and then one extraordinarily kind and genuinely thoughtful viewer decided to purchase it and send it to me. Now, I won't embarrass the guy by saying who it was, but his name's in the credits at the end of the video. And I do feel now that this has created the sort of social obligation that keeps me awake at 3 a.m, wondering if a YouTube video constitutes an adequate thank you for somebody's amazing generosity. I'm choosing to believe that it does, because the alternative is baking. And I've been banned from my own kitchen after what the fire brigade referred to as the mince pie incident of 2023. Now, being second-hand, this device actually arrived with Odin 2 stick caps instead of the original ones, and that's going to colour my review a little bit because I actually do really like these stick caps. I've got them on the portal. I think they're really nice. I suppose this is the same as, wearing second-hand shoes. They're perfectly usable, but every time I look at them, I'm reminded of somebody else's feet. What we've got here is the RG476H. I do love Anbernic's naming conventions that turn what should be a simple name into a string of characters that make it look like somebody's forgotten their password. But what that means is that you've got a 4.7-inch screen. It uses a 6th generation chipset. It's got a horizontal form factor. And whilst this device does nothing new, I mean, let's face it, a lot of Anbernic's devices don't do anything new. This one does combine two popular choices into a rather nifty package, though, which is sleek and somewhat pocketable, and it delivers the kind of performance that wouldn't be out of place on Britain's Got Talent, but probably wouldn't make it to the last semi-final. And of course, this is one of those Anbernic handhelds that runs Android. This was actually my first experience with Android on an Anbernic device. It's relatively customizable, which is actually just code for meaning that every problem that you encounter is technically your fault. But a lot of the legwork is actually done for you, and that's actually quite nice to see. And now I've said actually far too many times. But that leaves me asking one simple question. Should the 476H be included in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or is this one tough act to swallow? I said in the introduction that this is an amalgamation of two popular handheld choices. And we have to start by talking about one of them in particular, the display. Because this 4.7-inch screen with a 4:3 aspect ratio is really impressive. If you've been following retro handhelds for any length of time, you'll realise this is the same panel that's been used in the RG Slide and 477M. It's been a tremendously popular display, and as soon as you turn this thing on, you can see why. It's like Anbernic has carried the lesson of the H700 series processor over to their Android devices. If it ain't broke, slap it in a different form factor and sell it for $20 more. But this screen with this aspect ratio is perfect for retro gaming. You've got tremendous flexibility because of the resolution. Nintendo 64 games will run at a 4x integer scale, and for other systems where integer scaling isn't possible, the resolution is so high that it still looks clean rather than producing the sort of shimmering effect that suggests that your device has developed a nervous twitch. It's got a 120Hz refresh rate, which isn't just good for the things like black frame insertion, but it also reduces input latency and makes scrolling platformers feel more responsive and closer to the original CRT experience, minus the extraordinary electric bill. The trade-off, of course, is that 16:9 content looks a bit small, letterboxed into the device. But this is where the 476H has a little bit of a trick up its sleeve, because this isn't really powerful enough to play modern 16:9 systems. For those aspect ratios, emulation will cap out at PSP and PS Vita. The original PSP was a 4.3-inch 16:9 display with a physical width of 3.75 inches. The 476H also has a physical width of 3.75 inches, and that means if you play PSP on the system, you're actually seeing it as the same size as the original, but this hardware can handle 3x upscaling as well. PS Vita is a little bit smaller than the original, but not so much that you'd worry about it if you try playing it on this console. So the real question is whether you're tolerant of having black bars at the top and bottom of your screen. But the screen is just part of the story, of course. What's underneath is another. The 476H features the ever-popular Unisoc T820 processor, which has featured in a lot of the Anbernic devices recently. You've got 8GB of LPDDR4 RAM and 128GB of internal storage, although, let's face it, most of us will use an SD card for our games, which can be up to 2TB. The whole unit weighs about 300 grams, which gives it a little bit of density without making it too heavy. And it includes a 5000 mAh battery with USB-C charging, all running on Android 13 with access to the Google Play Store for anything you want to install. On top of all of this, is a glass front, which I know some people are going to like, but I also know a lot of people don't like because it does show smudges quite easily. I don't mind these new glass-fronted devices, and I've never seemed to have as many problems as some of the other reviewers. Some of the other reviewers are clearly eating Doritos in between testing games, but I am aware that this is an issue for many people, and the community is more divided than a pizza at a Weight Watchers meeting. The layout here is D-pad centric, and the majority of consoles that you're likely to play on this are going to be ones without analog sticks. But the D-pad itself is superb, which is becoming something of an Anbernic standard. It's got a classic bouncy feel to it, but it still has that defined pivot in the middle when you need it. It's exceptionally precise, passing the Kirby pancake test without breaking a sweat. The face buttons are equally impressive. They've got a really soft, springy, quiet, rubber membrane connection, giving you the sort of tactile feedback that makes you want to press them even when you're not playing anything. You do that too, right? That's not just me, is it? Down below, you've got two analog sticks, which are both Hall effect. These are standard mini Hall sticks. They aren't quite Xbox size, but they offer way more travel and precision than the tiny nubs you get on the Switch. You'll be used to seeing these on all of the recent devices which have had Hall sticks. They're essentially the same ones, but they're really nice to use, really responsive. And they have configurable RGB lighting, which, thank God, you can turn off in the settings. I'm sorry, I prefer my devices to look more like a piece of technology than a Christmas tree. Now, as I mentioned before, the sticks on my unit have Odin 2 caps on, which are slightly different from the originals, but they work really well. And if you can change these caps over whenever you want. If you wanted to get something like this, you'd have a really good time with it. I've always thought that being able to change sticks is a bit of a benefit, because if the original caps don't work for you, there's something out there that will. You've got stacked shoulder and trigger buttons, which I much prefer in terms of ergonomics. I've always hated inline ones, actually. The analog triggers on this are incredibly impressive, giving you a good amount of travel for games that require a variable input. They're very responsive, and although they stick out of the back of the unit a little, I think they're one of the highlights of the controls. The problem child on this device is actually the shoulder buttons. I have to admit, I don't find them too intrusive. I don't have much of a problem with clicky buttons, but they are very clicky and they are fairly loud, especially compared to the rest of the controls. Almost everybody seems to comment on these things, and I think it would have been nice if they'd used something to dampen the sound. But like I said, this doesn't worry me too much. But despite this, the overall control experience is excellent, both for retro gaming and for the more modern titles you're going to play here. 16-bit platformers, RPGs and fighting games are natural and responsive, and the single analog stick games from the N64 and Dreamcast era work beautifully. The trade-off is that dual analog games can sometimes be a little bit awkward to play, although I've found the experience quite comfortable, and I do think that depends on whether you prefer the Xbox style layout or a PS2 style layout. You know, I was a PS2 well, not a child, I was an adult at the time, but I was always in the PS2 camp. And so I favoured those controllers. I don't seem to have had too many problems. However, if your gaming tastes lean heavily towards modern-style first-person shooters, you might be better served with a device that has an Xbox-style layout. The processor itself is the same one that Anbernic has used in the RG406H. So RG46H. Bet they'll make one of those next. The RG556 and the RG Cube and RG Slide, which means that performance-wise, this is familiar territory for anybody who's been following the company over the past 18 months. Unsurprisingly, everything up to PlayStation 1 plays like a Dreamcast. And so does Dreamcast and Nintendo 64. In fact, you can even play these games with performance-intensive CRT shaders, adding to the overall gaming experience. Games can be upscaled to 960p, which means that you can get incredibly crisp graphics that fit perfectly on a 4x3 screen. PSP also performs exceptionally well, with all of the tested games running at a solid 60 frames per second, where appropriate. At a 3x resolution as well, by the way. The device is going to tap out at GameCube, PS2 and 3D emulation. The majority of GameCube games are playable at 1x resolution, but pushing this any higher isn't recommended. And even at native, your image can look slightly fuzzy on this higher resolution display. Whilst this is better than consoles like the Magmi Air X and Ioneer Pocket Air Mini, you should still expect some slowdowns and the occasional audio stutters, depending on what you're playing, particularly in more demanding titles. I'd estimate that maybe 80 to 90% of the catalogue is playable if you spend some time tweaking, but what that means is going to depend on your tolerance for maybe lower frame rates or maybe you're having performance hacks and things. PlayStation 2 is more challenging, and it's a little bit hit or miss. Many lightweight 2D games or the less demanding 3D games are perfectly playable at full speed. To help with this, I've been using PAL ROMs, which give you an extra 17% boost in performance. And being a Brit, this is actually how I would have experienced the games in the first place. So to me, it kind of seemed like the right thing to do anyway. But even then, many popular titles are still unreliable. Technically, this console can also handle a number of Nintendo Switch games and medium intensity Android games from the Google Play Store, but to be honest, those systems don't really seem to fit with what this console is trying to offer. 3DS emulation is a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of it runs incredibly well. You might have to switch between 1x or 2x resolution, depending on which title you're trying to run, and there are various setting tweaks that will make certain games more playable. But you really have to swap screens on this thing for the best 3DS experience, because trying to put two screens side by side or on top of one another in this particular device, it just doesn't cut it, I'm afraid. But then you come across the odd title that for some reason just won't run in a fun and playable way. It's frustrating because so much of the 3DS experience is actually quite good if you're playing mostly single-screen games. You might think if you're struggling to play a game, you can just put it in high performance mode and that might push the device enough, just push it over the edge a bit. But I actually found that there was very little difference between high performance and sort of the normal mode. High performance mode doesn't do anything in most applications. I couldn't really see much of a point to it. But that does leave us with a device that is excellent for what it's designed to do, which is play retro games from the 4x3 era. If you want the entirety of the GameCube and PS2 catalogues to run, you're going to have to try something a little bit more performant, I'm afraid. But for the price, this actually does remarkably well. It feels good in the hand, and the build quality is consistently excellent. This is solidly constructed with no give to the plastic. If you hear a squeak whilst you're using this device, then you're probably playing Mickey Mouse Castle of Illusions. And you can also pick this up and shake it, and you don't hear that sort of annoying rattle that you would expect to get on slightly cheaper devices. It's also, and I think I've mentioned this before, it's surprisingly comfortable to hold, and for long gaming sessions it's really nice, despite it not having any ergonomics to speak of. It fits very nicely into the hand, and your thumbs seem to just take up the perfect position for those D-pad-centric games. You've also got active cooling in here. You don't need to think much about this, you can just put it in automatic mode, and it rarely ramps up to an audible level. Even during demanding emulation, this never gets uncomfortably hot. There is one quality control issue, and that's with the little plastic flap that sits over the micro SD slot. A lot of people have noticed that when the card is inserted, this just slightly pokes out from the body. It doesn't seem too bad on mine, I have to admit. It's not too pronounced, but it is there. You can feel it when you rub your finger over it. And I've seen some examples where this actually seems an awful lot worse. But honestly, I suppose that's more of a nitpick than anything else, and you won't notice it on a day-to-day gaming experience. The battery life here is exceptional. The device has a 5,000 mAh battery, and that's going to give you around 5 hours, even when you're playing some of the heavier PS2 and GameCube games. It might dip a little bit below that. It depends on, what shaders you're using, how bright you have the screen, all that sort of thing. But if you're only interested in playing the 16-bit library and you just want something premium to play it on, then you're looking anything between 5 to 15 hours of gameplay. You also have very little power drain if you left this overnight in standby mode. And speaking of which, the one area that let down this console isn't a hardware one at all, it's a software one. Anbernic have done an awful lot over the last year or so to up their game when it comes to the Linux front end that they use. They don't seem to have put the same amount of effort into the software experience on Android. And while some things are set up for you, some of the emulators are already installed. There are parts of this system that you've got to tweak yourself, which can be quite frustrating, especially if you've moved from their Linux-based devices, which are pretty much just all set up for you. It's silly little things like the aspect ratio being wrong in the default launcher. This sort of stuff should all have been sorted out on a software level. The launcher has basic ROM management, and I actually quite liked it for the most part. But many people are going to want to install a third-party front end like the SDE, Digisho, or the Beacon launcher. Now, you can use Beacon on this, and you can't on some of their lower-powered devices because they don't install the Play Store on it. But whilst you have the flexibility of Android to tailor the system however you want, it would be nice if you felt that you didn't have to. Video out is also a compromised experience. On the cheaper Linux devices, you have two USB-C slots, one to handle HDMI and other inputs and outputs, and the other one to handle charging. It would have been lovely to have this on this much more expensive device, but here the single USB port can't handle power delivery and video signal at the same time. So whilst it's capable of being used like a console, you don't actually get the power benefits of docking. These are more annoyances than anything else, and they'll matter depending on how you want to use the console. Some people aren't going to be worried about those things at all. And at around $150 to $165, this is probably the best horizontal handheld available at this price point for 4x3 retro gaming. Depending on what happens to RAM over the next year and what happens to the price of chips, this may change significantly. We're already seeing a reduction of the price of the Retroid Pocket 5 now that the Retroid Pocket 6 is available. Those devices will absolutely blow through the PS2 and GameCube catalogue, and they'll allow you to do a significant amount of Switch emulation as well. But I think there's still a place for this little device. When I first started this hobby, I bought an Anbernic. It was the Cube XX, and I really love that thing, I still do. It plays an awful lot of games that I adore, and it plays them really well. However, the experience of using this is significantly better. And if you want a good all-round device for your retro games, then this could be it. The extra performance and RAM on this system gives you a distinct boost for Dreamcast, PSP, and Nintendo 64 games. Stuff that couldn't run on those other systems can run on this, and it runs remarkably well. If you're happy with tweaking, then you're going to have a lot of fun. And if you are, there's a big portion of the PlayStation and GameCube catalogue that you can get to run as well, and plenty of 3DS titles to explore too. And whilst newer devices like the Mangmi Air X and the Ioneo Pocket Mini can handle the same catalogues, this just gives you the extra boost you need to take you over the line on some of the more popular titles. And it does all of that with this brilliant display. with a comfortable form factor and an excellent controls and a battery that in some cases just seems to last forever. And if that appeals to you, then I think you'll have a really good time with this console. That's what I think anyway, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Does this device appeal to you, or are you holding out for a hero, something that is a lot more powerful? There is, of course, the 477V and the 477M on the market. I have some here for testing. I'll put videos out as soon as I can. Are they more to your taste? As always, the discussion continues below, and if you'd like to leave a like whilst you're down there, then please do. But that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Until the next time we find ourselves huddled into my little retro corner, happy gaming.